So, welcome everybody. We are excited to have you guys back for the fourth panel discussion that we're having, and the first one of 2022, as I said. Today, we have quite a few new folks in the audience, partially because this topic is about TPM partnership with other functions and disinterest more than the TPM. So welcome all other folks who have never been on our panels in the past. I would like you guys to, as you keep on joining, continue introducing yourself in the Slack, in the Zoom chat, your name, role, company you work for. Quick background on this group. It started as a San Francisco-based in-person meetup in 2018. I got introduced to it in 2019. I managed to host an in-person meetup in Airbnb in early 2020, just before COVID stalled us. Then it took us a while to see where the world was going and how do we get people together. And in 2021, we thought, okay, let's start doing some virtual panel sessions that keeps the learning going. While we have done a few panels, we have a TPM Slack workspace where users interact and connect with each other. This workspace is a safe place to make meaningful connections. So if you are a TPM and would like to be part of a bigger TPM community, I have posted a link to the Google form. I'll repost it again. I'll post it on the LinkedIn TPM meetup page also. We'd love to hear insights from you and help you connect on the TPM workspace. So now back to Zener to take this discussion underway.
Awesome, thank you, Harman. This will be a discussion today, but I still have a few slides. The topic of today's event is perspectives. And for previous events, we usually had TPMs as speakers, as panelists. We had people who excelled in their TPM career in different companies, from Meta, Facebook to Dropbox. We also had speakers who built TPM teams in companies like Stripe or Robinhood. So primarily it was TPMs talking to TPMs. This time around, we decided to invite our partners and major stakeholders from product management and engineering to share their perspectives on a TPM craft. So before going there, quick highlight of the team. So you already met Harman. We also have Jen Russell from Twilio helping out today with the event. And basically making sure that everything runs smoothly. And from the panelists' perspective, we will ask panelists to introduce themselves, but this is a quick highlight. So we do have speakers from the leadership and individual contributor perspectives and point of views. So we will ask some questions that we prepared in advance, but also we're looking forward to your questions. So please add those questions into Q&A section of Zoom or upvote the ones that you are interested in. So with that, I actually want to invite our panelists to the virtual stage. If you all could come up, that'd be great. Welcome, 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 everyone. Really, really appreciate your participation. I truly believe that as TPM community, we will all benefit from hearing your ideas, your thoughts, your perspectives on where as a community we can excel, where you see value, where you see actually some friction points. So this is a safe space to discuss and bring your thoughts to the table. Not only from the good side, but also from improvement point of view as well. So let's start from brief introductions. And the leading question is, can you share a little about your work history and highlight some of the exciting things that you worked on? And Kirti, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. I am Kirti Chitness, and I am a product manager in Google. I'm really excited. Thank you for having me here, and would love to share my experience working with TPMs in the past and what has worked well. Briefly about me, I have worked in product in several tech companies in the past, Microsoft, Amazon, smaller companies, DeviantArt. I've also done my own startups, and I've worked on a variety of products around enterprise, mobile, community products as well. And so I've always been a generalist, but most recently I have gravitated towards the fraud and trust and safety space. And this is primarily because I started to feel like a sense of responsibility that the technology, the solutions that we build are safe for everybody, especially after what we've been through in the last 2 years and as we continue to see conflict in the world. I currently lead customer experience for Google Payments Fraud. And essentially, I'm responsible for making sure that, the dolphins don't get stuck when we're trying to catch the sharks, very simply put. Previously, I was at YouTube and I led the enforcement platform to make sure we took down violative content. And interesting anecdote, I don't know if I should call it fun or not, because there are many reasons why not. But when the pandemic hit, at the onset of the pandemic, YouTube had a ton of human reviewers. And we sent all of them home because, of course, they couldn't come into the office because of the pandemic. And I was part of the core team responsible for turning on automated takedowns at a much lower precision of a lot of video content, and it came in the news. It was a very exciting yet scary period, essentially. So that's just a fun anecdote there. And for the TPM meetup, I'll say that, yes, I've worked with a lot of TPMs, and I can vouch that a good TPM-PM relationship can be magical. And I'm excited to share what has worked for me in the past.
Awesome. Welcome, Kirti. Moving on to Nihil. Nihil, please introduce yourself and your history.
Sounds good. Thank you, Zanath and Harman, and really excited to be part of this community. I'm Nihil Joshi. I am currently a product lead at Facebook/Meta, as it's now called. I have had a long history of working with some really awesome TPMs in the Bay Area, and I'm hoping that through the course of this conversation, I can provide some insights about what things go well and where things can be improved. So before I joined Facebook, I spent a bunch of years at Uber, started back in 2016. In fact, Zheng, who's a fellow panelist, was my colleague, and Zanath also. So a few years at Uber, I have held roles both as a technical person. I was an engineer by trade and defected over to product management at some point. I also have had experiences in both like enterprise B2B companies, Pivotal, Greenplum, and consumer internet companies like Yahoo, Facebook, and right now Meta. So I think I can bring the perspective of how enterprise versus B2B also differs pretty significantly. I live in the Bay Area with my wife and 2 kids.
Awesome. Thank you, Nihil. Over to you, Dmitry.
All right, hello. So I'm Dmitry. I am currently, I guess, a head of engineering of one of the areas at Stripe. Actually, I've been at Stripe for only a few months. And we're working on a fairly large launch that I can't really talk about. It's going to become public at the sessions presentation, I believe on May 24th. Prior to that, I spent a little bit of time. I went back to AWS EC2 for about half a year, and but prior to that, I was at Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for 5 years, and before that, I was again at AWS for about 3 years. I think these are kind of the relevant experiences for this purpose. AWS in general has a very weird view on TPMs. So I think AWS is still figuring out how to utilize TPMs in most of the cases. And a lot of the burden falls onto engineering managers with various kind of results. At Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, I've worked a lot with TPMs because I've owned a number of platforms, starting from the back-end development lifecycle platforms, and then moving on towards the front end, basically all of Oracle Cloud Portal, or I guess dashboard, and like basically all of the Oracle Cloud UI. So these are kind of the spanning things that touch pretty much every other area within the company. So TPMs are essentially like participation is invaluable in this context.
Great. Last but not the least, Zheng.
That's Shagat. My name is Xiao. So I started my career as an engineer back at the Yahoo when I was working on search engine. I don't know if any of you guys remember Yahoo did have a search engine, but apparently that was probably a wrong career choice for me. But then, luckily, because I also realized that, right? So I left Yahoo and joined Facebook relatively early in 2008, and still being IC, engineering IC on the team. I worked on big data technologies like Apache Hive and Scribe and streaming processing, and then RuxDB and MySQL. I moved to engineering management along the way. Also moved out from Facebook to Dropbox, then later to Uber. And after a while at Uber, I decided to move back to the IC role on the engineering side. And that was when I got a chance to work with TPMs very, very closely, including Shanat, including some of Shanat's colleagues at Uber. Right? So, and some of the projects I worked on are more like my role is a tech lead. And then I have a TPM who work with me very closely, and we kind of co-lead the program across many, many engineers and many, many teams across our nation. So I would love to share some of my experience on that front. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhang. So thank you all for introductions. Collectively, 4 of you bring more than 80 years of experience across at least 15 tech companies. So that's impressive. Most of these companies have the TPM role, as we already said, some of them for a long time, like Google, Facebook, Amazon. Some others introduced the TPM role more recently, like Stripe. And well, some of them are still yet to introduce, like 𝗳𝗲𝗁𝘁𝘂𝗽 data, right? Zhang, I don't think you have TPMs yet.
Nope.
No. So in this journey, a quick question. I actually want you to go back in your memory lane and remember, when was the first time you worked with TPM? What was the challenge you were solving for? And what was your first impression of working with TPMs? Pros, cons, any type of feedback on your very first interaction with TPMs. And Nihil, let's start with you this time.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'm going back quite a long way, so my details might be fuzzy. But when I started my career at Yahoo, the world was starting to get aware of privacy concerns with advertising, and people were starting to understand, like, hey, what's my data doing? How's it used? So the world congregated around this concept called ad choices. If you see a display ad to the top right, you see a really small icon called ad choices, and you can click on it and you can say, don't show me ads like this, or opt me out, a bunch of things. So I was an engineer who was helping build out some of the ad choices implementation for what was called the Right Media Exchange back in the day. And I worked very closely with a TPM partner to help me execute that massive program. As you know, I think Yahoo used to do 9 billion display ads a day. So massive amount of display ads, and this had to be implemented to make sure there's no performance regression, no drop in the funnel, etc. So the TPM partner really helped rally privacy, legal, regulation, front-end, creatives, back-end, auction, all of these teams, and really took the program end to end. It was a multi-half, multi-quarter kind of an effort. That was my first stint where I kind of even recognized the fact of the glue-like functionality that really good TPMs can bring to a very complicated long-term technical project like ad choices.
Beautiful story. Over to Zhang.
Yeah, so my first interaction with TPM was at Facebook, and that was pretty brief. The reason is because actually I don't know that TPM, but she came to me, asked me a bunch of questions related to my domain, and we didn't collaborate afterwards. And I was just curious, saying, hey, TPMs, like, do they just like go talk with people and then have a nice chat, and what kind of things they do? That was my question at the time, right? So, but within my team, because my project is very centralized and I don't have a need to work with the TPM. So that was my first interaction. So my view completely changed when I moved to Uber and started to work with the TPM very closely, right? So, and the project that I worked on was called All Active. Basically, it's an active setup for the multi-data center setup of the big data stack at Uber, right? So, and that involves like talking with 20+ different teams with many engineers. And then I have a partner TPM who totally like taking care of the communication, taking care of the scheduling, taking care of the timeline of the project, right? So, and then making sure the leadership as well as the team align very, very well, right? So that was when I felt like, whoa, TPM can provide such a big help, right? Because I was an IC at the time, I was as a tech lead of a project, and my role is more like inwards thinking about, hey, what are the holes on the technical design? While I don't have to like kind of deal with a lot of people because our TPMs is totally responsible for that.
Got it. Awesome. Next, Qiṛṭi, tell us your story.
Sure. My story here involves Harman, actually, because Harman and I work together at Amazon Music. And so I think I think Amazon has a very strong TPM discipline. And I think, the kind of role that Amazon TPMs play, of course, maybe in some teams, like, Zhang was mentioning, maybe, or I think was it Dmitry, like AWS, maybe it's less so, but there are certain teams within Amazon, like the media teams, the Alexa teams, etc., where TPMs play a pretty central role in terms of really moving things forward. And I think I'll attest to the fact that, when it's smaller, like the problem is smaller, product managers, engineering managers can somehow figure it out and make it work, keep the lights running. But I think the real beauty of, what TPMs add is when the project gets really large and complex and the number of stakeholders really grows, there it's like really critical for TPM to step in. A PM cannot do it alone. So like my story really involves like, we were working on the music launch of a high definition music in Amazon. And really it was going to change exactly how the entire tech stack was going to work, because we had a catalog which was based on standard definition, and we had all the search and indexing that was based on that. The front end, the clients were based on that. We had like the merchandising teams, all of that, all the pipelines were based on a very standard system. The labels would deliver to us as a standard form. And if we wanted to go high definition, a lot of that would break. And we really didn't have that. We had committed to a much tighter deadline. And, as Amazon, like, we work backwards from a well-established PRFAQ, like, everybody agrees on that. And the thing about the PRFAQ is that it not only defines the product, it also says the date, right? I mean, of course, there are some slips in the date, but here we had committed to like a product and essentially the date. And I think that's where the PM.
I think we're losing some connection from Qiṛṭi. Okay, we'll give her a few minutes to join. Qiṛṭi, can you hear us? Okay, well, that's all the beauty of current connected world. Qiṛṭi, one more check. Can you hear us? Okay, we'll give Qiṛṭi a few minutes to join. Dmitry, why don't you share your story in the meantime?
Yeah, I think my first encounter with the TPM as a role in general came when I joined Amazon for the first time, AWS. I think it was 2013. I moved to Seattle from New York, mostly working with media companies. And I actually have never encountered the TPM title before, kind of in that world. Like I mentioned before, I joined AWS 2013. It was still fairly small, I would say, very aggressively growing. And I think there was a bit of a challenge for like, there were TPMs, but I think it was challenging for these TPMs to kind of find their place within this like a very aggressively growing organization. So I was working on a project. I own a number of billing systems for all of AWS, and I was working on a project to implement new rules across multiple systems to accommodate for European VAT 2015 tax changes. And it required basically like a 15 different teams to be pulled together and coordinated. And I think the problem with at least at that time with AWS was that it relied on this extreme quote unquote bias for action being one of the leadership principles. And if you did not exhibit that, like nobody came to you you had to go and you had to hustle and you had to go bother everybody, and then you had to be very forceful because you're basically disrupting work for 15 different teams. And I think at some point I kind of had to do this myself and basically say, like, I was unfortunately not getting support from the TPM that I had, but I kind of understood what needed to be done, and I had to kind of jump into that fire myself and kind of provide that more aggressive approach towards like pulling people together, creating urgency, and making sure that everything was tied together. Because again, being a tax project, it was a brick wall project, so there is no way to fail for the date that we were supposed to launch. So you know, I guess it's not the most positive story, but that was my first. So
that's precisely why we are having this conversation, right? We want to see it from different perspectives, from different experiences, so that we as a community can learn from it and see where we can step up. Well, thank you all for the stories. I think everybody would agree that building and nurturing strong relationships across partners and stakeholders is frankly a key skill in any role, and certainly very important for TPMs. And that's why we gathered this panel to see the subject of TPM craft from different points of view, from different perspectives. To this extent, I want to share your quote-unquote roles today with the rest of the audience. So Zheng, even though you had leadership positions in the past, today I would love you to represent mostly the engineering IC role, as you worked as the distinguished engineer as an IC in Uber and other companies. Nihil, you'll be representing the product management leadership role, more organizational. Chitty, you represent the individual contributor product management role. And Dmitry, you will have a role of engineering leadership in this conversation. So with that roles, the next question is the following, and I'll give some context. So within the TPM community, we often talk about the blurry lines between responsibilities of these different roles, right? Whether it's product manager, tech lead, engineering manager. Dmitry, you had a story where the responsibilities were also not clear who's doing what. So let's talk a little bit about that. I would love to start from the leadership perspective. So Dmitry, actually the first question is to you. So from the engineering leadership perspective, how do you see the overlap between responsibilities and boundaries between engineering managers and TPMs?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, it's in many ways it's a partnership, right? It's a partnership, and it kind of TPMs. I rely on TPMs to keep me honest, right, and kind of to provide the necessary structure for the program to be successful, right, and kind of like maintain this ledger of like how things are moving, to make it basically so I see at any given point how things are, right. I think on my end, besides the kind of obvious like people management stuff, there's some technical, like a more technical decision making that happens on my side, and then sometimes it's just kind of again, it's a partnership where the TPM in many ways drives the fact that we need to have a meeting, for instance, with this partner for this project. We all get together in the room, and then I might be the one who kind of provides like not necessarily decision making, but like energy for the meeting, right? And then kind of like drives the decision making there, but then kind of confirms with the TPM that we're actually, based on that decision making is aligned with the schedule and the goals and the timelines that we have. So again, it's a partnership. It's people versus very strict lines. Like it's never like, you do these 5 things, I do these 5 things, right? So it's more people over like specific tasks, but in general, this is how I see the balance.
Got it. Thank you for that perspective. Nihil, next to you. Now, from the product leadership perspective, what strategic decisions are made better by product managers versus TPMs?
Yeah. So I think you guys mentioned it, and the roles are extremely fluid. In most companies I have seen is that the senior EM, TPM, and PM just tend to fill the gaps that exist. So a TPM can do a role of a PM in some aspects and other way around. You guys must have heard of this common definition, right? Like the TPMs are mostly responsible for the when and the who, and the PMs are responsible for the what and the why. That usually holds true, but I would like to have another dimension. In my experience, PMs have been more outward facing, which means understand who the customer is, understand what the market is doing, understand where the competition is, understand where we launch. So very outward looking, while TPMs tend to be very detail oriented and inward looking, right? They understand, is there enough resourcing for this project? What are the timelines? What are the core dependencies, etc. So the key strategic decisions that are in each person's bucket is also along those lines. PMs tend to do strategic decisions about product direction, right? Like, hey, should we go after young adults or not is a very strategic product decision that a PM is well positioned to take because of that outward perspective, while TPMs have had very strategic say in the matter, like, hey, are we on track to deliver GDPR, or should we raise the concern to the auditors today? Are we on track to launch the new Instagram front-end rewrite, or do we have to hold off the PR train? What are the risks we see if we were to launch this incentive at this time when 13 other dependencies are not met? So those are the kinds of risk management / raising the red flag like strategic issues that have been very timely and have literally saved companies millions of dollars when done right. That's just one angle. I mean, there are exceptions to almost every rule. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. This is actually a good segue to Kirti. Now to you, as a product manager, individual contributor, like working with TPMs, what's the best collaboration mode between PMs and TPMs? Is it clear segregation or joint, clear segregation of duties or joint ownership of the final outcome? I think you're muted.
Yeah, definitely a combination of both is what I would say. I think, of course, at a basic level, there is some segregation by design. Like there are different skill sets that are needed of a product manager versus a TPM. And I think some of the things which Nihil mentioned are definitely, differences that are very apparent. You can think about, when I think about a PM versus a TPM, really a PM to a certain extent is a salesperson, right? I'm really selling what is the problem, why is it worth solving, and what is the right solution. And I have to constantly sell. And a lot of times I have to sell it to external folks, I have to sell it to leadership, I have to sell it to all types of stakeholders, business stakeholders, operations stakeholders. Why should we really do this, right? And that most part of the PM's day goes into convincing people that, yes, please, agree that this is the right thing to do and let's do it. I think I would, risk management is the exact word that I had in mind for TPM2, just like Nihil. Is like, to a certain extent, it's really like, okay, now that we've all agreed that we should be building this, what are all the things that we need to do to build it and what could go wrong, right? And you really have to like put on your hat of like all possible things and really think deep, think broad, keep an eye on everything. And to a certain extent, in really good projects and really good TPMs, they're managing everybody, including the PM to a certain extent, because everybody has to be accountable and the TPM is holding them accountable. So to a certain extent, I feel like a TPM is responsible for all stakeholders, whereas a PM is more responsible for external business, operations, design, stakeholders, and like, rolling up, when a PM is really rolling up updates, they're rolling up how the product has delivered based on what it promised, whereas a TPM is really delivering on the progress. Is the project tracking per the plan? What are the risks? What's going wrong? So that's the differences, but I do think that both TPM and PM, it's really like both of them really need to lead without authority. That goes without saying, because both of them don't have people reporting to them, but they really have to rally a lot of people to get things done. So there is really leading without authority, ownership, bias for action, which are very much common to both PM and TPM. And I think both are, to a certain extent, jointly responsible for the project success. You could have great execution and the product bombs. And yes, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. Everybody is feeling hurt, but the product did great well. That's not a win-win situation. You really need both to go well. And I sort of had like it's not like a not my problem kind of thing. When they're working together, they both have to kind of, like parenting, pull it together.
I really love that parenting comparison. We expect a new kid in our family to join like in 2 weeks. So for all the parents, kudos. And here you go. You have some good analogies between work and parenting. So switching to the engineering perspective, Zheng, from the engineering IC perspective, what skills do you think are truly force multipliers in TPMs? Is it organizational, technical, people skills, strategic thinking?
Yeah, sensible question. And my answer is actually the multiple aspects that I feel is really precious from the TPM side. The first one is mostly related to this word technical, right? So, and I interpret that as a very broad technical knowledge across the organizations. Right? So as an engineer, when I work with TPMs, sometimes TPM can tell me a lot of technical knowledge outside of my domain that I never heard about. Right? So when I think about making my technical decisions, I may not have the knowledge, and TPM become kind of the person that I can always go to and then look for whatever technical information I need. I think this is the first force multipliers. Right? The second thing is probably related to this word program, right? So that is about keeping everything clean and organized. And usually that involves a lot of tooling. Right? Sometimes it's, let's say those, Gantt chart. Sometimes it's as simple as a spreadsheet as well, right? So, and I think that's one area sometimes is a little bit fuzzy. I have seen cases that between TPM and some engineering ICs, right? So let's say for example, nobody is expert of a spreadsheet, right? So then what do we do, right? So who does it? And I believe the best way to do is both sides need to learn about the skill set that is a gap. Right? So, and then it doesn't really matter who does it, but I think the TPM and the engineer both need to learn about that, right? So that we can do the job together really well. And the last thing probably about the management side, that's about the strategic thinking and strategic decision making. And I feel a lot of them come from the thinking framework, right? So those thinking frameworks are taught in business schools a lot of times. Right? We don't use that on a daily basis within engineering, but it's extremely powerful when there are bigger decisions to make. Right? So where we have to consider all the fronts, let's say 5 forces model, SWOT model, right? So all the models, right? Not something that engineers think about day to day, right? And I have seen TPMs can put down those frameworks very clearly in front of everyone and then get everybody on the same page about the strategic decision making. Those are the three.
Thank you. Thank you. It's interesting you brought up business schools. I personally yet to see a lot of TPMs who actually attended business schools. I think a lot of TPMs come from technical background as well. I might be completely wrong about this, but I think that's also a good discussion. So if anyone in the audience, if you are a TPM and you have business background, some MBA, please let us know. I think it will be really interesting to learn about that. With that, let's shift our focus to an organizational structure in engineering to begin with. So TPMs, we gravitate towards cross-functional programs, right? So often I hear TPMs saying, I want to own a problem space, deliver something beneficial for the company end to end. But on the other hand, I also hear quite often from my partners in engineering that they need a permanent partner that they can rely on longer term, right? So this positioning of TPMs aligned with the programs or TPMs aligned with engineering organizational structure is a big question. And Dmitry, I think you are positioned well to kind of share your insights on that question. So in our previous meetups, we actually hosted Amanda Donahue, who leads the tech programs in Stripe. And she mentioned that TPMs in Stripe are part of one team. But from the perspective of engineering leadership, how would you best position TPMs in a company? Closer to the teams or more aligned with the programs and outcomes?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I'm fairly practical in my approaches to things, and I'm more of a function over form kind of a person, right? So, and I've seen it to work both ways, and it depends on the leadership, on the you know, whether it's engineering leadership or the leadership of the TPM or the PMO org that exists with, you know, that kind of provides the centralized TPM resourcing. I prefer it it depends on the, again, on the engineering org. If engineering org owns a platform that is spanning multiple surfaces, if it's something that is used, you know, if it's like you know, an identity layer that's used by like every other team, or if it's, you know, some kind of infrastructure piece or whatever it is, I think it makes a lot of sense to have a number of TPMs to be very familiar with that particular team and be attached directly to that team, because it requires kind of a depth of knowledge and expertise of, you know, the roadmaps, the timelines, you know, how things operate, like what are the dependencies and things like that. And I think it's very difficult to acquire that expertise with kind of this, you know, periodic engagements, right? If it's a different situation where there are lots of smaller teams that need to be coordinated, and there is really like, you know, they're sort of more isolated, and the programs are just like making sure that, you know, a lot of you know, tasks are performed at the same time, then it can be kind of a centralized TPM resourcing. It also works, for instance, for like large spanning initiatives, the more senior TPM. So for instance, you know, everybody needs to roll out new, I don't know, like Jen knows that I'm traumatized with like big compliance initiatives, right? Like everybody in the company needs to roll out like new, you know, new compliance measurements, right? Like you can have, like, you basically have, you know, then you have the high level centralized TPM org that probably coordinates with more local TPMs that are attached to teams and then kind of orchestrates that effort. But that definitely needs like a more centralized approach.
Right. I think the privacy programs really became a bread and butter of TPMs. I think every TPM did something related to CCPA or GDPR, or as I'm hearing now, CPRA is a new 4-letter privacy term that's coming up next year. So this is a topic for a separate meetup. Like, how do you deal with all the privacy regulations? Thanks for that perspective. Zhang, next question is for you. And this time I would love to ask you, as a CTO and a co-founder of a startup with, I believe, less than 10 people at the moment, what are your thoughts as a CTO on when to introduce TPM role, and how would you organizationally position the first hire?
I just realized I forgot to introduce myself on that part, right? So I actually left Uber about 1.5 months ago and started a company called Blue Sky Data with the purpose of helping like customers like a Snowflake to reduce their cloud bills. And for our team right now, within like, let's say just 2 months, we have about 10 people, right? So we are growing pretty fast. And frankly, I haven't thought about hiring TPM until Shannon asked me this question. But I would imagine it will look like this, right? The team will continue to grow. Engineering team, so at some point we'll start to have an engineering manager. I think on the scale about 30 engineers plus 2 to 3 engineering manager. At that time is when I would have to consider about hiring TPMs. Right? It might be a little bit like earlier than some other people may thought, right? But in my opinion, is the engineering managers are mainly looking at the internal teams, right? But there will be a lot of cross-team collaborations, especially also between the engineers and the non-engineering roles. So for example, the business side, sales and marketing and the, let's say whatever, so the product management. There are cases that we need communication help, and TPMs can be a very good, I would say, skill set or the person to drive that. Although I think one interesting thing is I will be like a little bit careful about giving the title just called TPM. Although that person may have the TPM background, right? when he get into my team, whether I still kind of use this term TPM as a title or not, I think is going to be interesting. The reason is because I feel there's kind of this kind of stereotype when people think about TPM, right? So, and for a startup, we want somebody who can do multiple things, right? And that person may need to expand beyond the normal definition of TPM. And I think that will be the real kind of the force multiplier to a startup, right? So, and come back to, I think this is one thing that I feel pretty strongly about is the startup setup is pretty different from more established company where everybody has more kind of clear roles, right? So a startup, we want everybody to wear multiple hats. And I feel like TPM have a special skill set, and they can do more than what they usually do in the big companies.
Right. I think that covers this overlap in responsibilities, right? In one of our prior meetups, we actually had this topic, and we had TPMs who converted to chief of staff or who converted to product managers, because there is so much similarity in the roles. And I think you have a great point that the smaller the company, the more you want to pull as an individual in that startup and wearing multiple hats. Now switching to the product management perspective, Nihil, so you work both on platforms like big data platforms and customer-facing products like shopping, right? And what is your perspective of overlap of PM and TPM roles in these different domains, like product engineering versus platforms versus infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Let me start with kind of drawing some observations of the differences between the two domains. In products which are lower in the stack, like infrastructure and platforms, I have noticed those organizations tend to be extremely engineering heavy, as in there are a lot more engineers and the ratio of product managers or program managers in that organization is kind of low. But that changes as you go up the stack. I think a lot of XFN burden starts up as you start building consumer products. So you need a marketing team, you need a content designer, you need a front-end designer, you need a program manager. So a lot of those things. So having that distinction in mind, the overlaps don't really change, but I think the lift per product manager or per TPM changes a lot. So as Zheng was explaining, when we were working on some big data infrastructure efforts at Uber, our TPMs used to literally draw out forecasts for the next 5 years, create extremely detailed spreadsheets of how every organization is consuming resources, how do we charge them back. So pretty technical and pretty heavy lift in terms of execution. But the TPMs that I have worked with higher up the stack don't get the opportunity to flex their technical muscles as much. And the execution rigor there is more about collaboration and alignment than actually doing hands-on work to get insights.
Got it. Yeah, I think I had the similar observation, but I like that you mentioned that up the stack, TPMs has less ability to flex the technical part of things, which Zheng, by the way, mentioned that from the engineering perspective is one of the key skills that TPMs bring to the table. So we are getting to the top of the hour. I think I have one final question, Kirti, for you as a product manager. What are the 2-3 things that you wish TPMs can always do that can help PMs focus more on the product vision and feature set that we on the TPM community can take away today?
Sure. I think my sort of takeaway here was a little bit similar to what Zheng was saying, in that I really feel like the technical term is a little bit misleading, because to a certain extent, a really good TPM or whatever this new role would be is somebody who is very all-rounded and has, from my perspective, 3 types of awareness. One is business and product awareness. You don't need to be an expert, but you really need to know what are we building and why, and keep the PMs accountable and honest. And I really enjoyed when, some of, like, I have conversations with my TPMs and they ask me, like, but wait a minute, you missed this use case, but you are not really targeting the right people if this is what you claim. So they're really, really insightful, and they're calling out flaws and keeping me accountable. Number two, they are actually really, they have a good sound understanding of the technology at the right level, right? That doesn't mean they need to code, but they know what is possible, what is not. They can ask the right questions to the engineering managers, keep them accountable. Because when somebody says it's not possible, they need to know, they can call out, no, I think this is possible because I understand this platform this way. And that's very, very critical. And number three is organizational, which is where you really have a good emotional handle on who's making the right decisions within the organization, who do you need to go to get things moving forward, and really deliver on the project. So I would say with that kind of an awareness, a PM can sleep at night with a lot of peace, because they know that the TPM is really handling it. And I think that sort of leads to two things. One is that you're really executing and you're managing risk very, very well. And two, everybody knows what you're doing, right? So if you keep that, business, technology, and organizational awareness, really sound, then those are the best skills. And that can make for a chief of staff, that can make for, the right analogy I think about is Jared Dunn from Silicon Valley. I don't know if everybody's seen it, but that's where he's sort of the catch-all, right? He's thinking through everything. He's asking Richard the right questions. He's making sure, Guilfoyle is doing the right things, and what servers to buy. But that's what a TPM to a certain extent is. It's that catch-all, and they just need to know right enough about everything that they can help. And that's where, it's not just technical, it's business and organization as well, is how I look at it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that insight, Kirti. I really love the Silicon Valley comparison. Still need to catch up on the last season. Haven't had a chance to watch that. I think with that, we are ready for questions from the audience. And Harman, welcome back to the virtual stage.
I can throw up some of the questions that have come in the audience. That would be helpful.
Let's do that.
Let's start with the first question. And Nihil, I would put it for you. Do TPMs have a seat at the table in the product business strategy?
Absolutely so. Yes, absolutely so. So the way it works in Meta is we are organized around what's called XFN Pod. So XFN is cross-functional pods. So at the seat of the table is almost every trade in the business. So there is a design manager present, there is a TPM, there is a PM, engineering counterpart, and in some cases, even operational leads and legal leads. And all decisions are made as part of this XFN pod. So say the product manager is proposing a whole new initiative that's going to take 6 months. That is not going to even take off is not going to get off the ground without having the right sets of buy-in from our partners. So yes, TPMs definitely have a seat at the table, including individual contributor TPMs, because of how skewed the ratio of eng to PM/TPM is, that you are essentially making a decision for what 10 engineers are going to be working over the next 4 to 6 months.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, the next question here that I want to put forward is, what is the best way TPMs can best engage with the respective engineering teams? What are some of the perspective on engagement expectations from both sides? Maybe Dmitry, this is something you could help us answer.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what the engagement is and what engineering teams those are, right? If this is just bringing, if this is a centralized effort when a bunch of engineering teams need to be brought together, I would start with reaching out to the engineering managers and kind of minimize randomization of the ICs. That's probably overall the best way for kind of for TPMs to interact with the engineering teams, to kind of make sure that, engineering managers serve in many ways as a shield for ICs, to make sure that, ICs can be kind of perform the work that they need to perform without being randomized with too many meetings and too many, potentially contentious discussions. So that's probably kind of the best way to do that. And then I think, pulling people in the room is probably the most effective way. if, sending emails is the least effective way, right? So sending more emails is even worse, right? So like at some point, like the process, I'm gonna kind of like say a general thing, like that when we build software, we build something for customers, right? We want to make sure that we abstract complexity from customers, right? And that, the customers have nice interface and all of the engineering complexity is sitting behind that. In many ways, TPM sort of like serve that role for, program management, where like a lot of the complexity of like pulling, dates together, like organizing schedules, like, getting all the tasks and everything is sort of abstracted in many ways. And, it's, instead of bringing the whole team together and going over action items one by one and making sure that like all the dates are aligned, a lot of that work is like, done either on individual basis with engineering managers in the meeting, but like at the end of the day, there is kind of like this clean interface, which provides very like a clear and concise picture, essentially, of how things are going, and that's kind of the best way I can put it.
Great, thanks, Dmitry, for that answer. The next question that I have here is that I was trying to get to is if there are like 5+ long-range growth projects or 0 to 1 projects where heavy planning is needed. Kirti, this one I'm looking for you to answer, but the question on that front is, how do you differentiate the roles of a PM and TPM? Or would you call this as a planning phase as TPM wearing a PM hat?
So is the question around planning like longer-term projects?
A project where heavy planning is needed, like a long-range project or a 0 to 1 project where you'll need a lot of planning. And in that planning phase, do you call a TPM wearing a PM hat? And how do you differentiate the roles between the PM and TPM as it's said?
I think it's important to distinguish the planning of what, right? Like if you have a major, product initiative, you really want to have, the initial planning and the themes and what are the kind of like stages at which how the rollout will happen, coming more from a product standpoint. But I think there are a lot of projects that are long-range projects where I think TPMs take a great deal of initiative that are like migration and privacy and compliance, where I think to a certain extent they are actually wearing a product hat because they're strategizing what are the things they want to do first and what are the things they want to do next, what is least risky, what is more risky, and be able to plan around that. And really like the boundaries do blur there. And so I definitely see there, I think like to me, a TPM is a very well-rounded person. So they need to do a little bit of everything. So there will be certain phases where they will wear the product hat to a certain extent. Sometimes they can also wear the engineering hat and be scoping and like allocating resources. So I see TPMs actually being really, all-rounded and doing whatever it takes essentially.
Great. Thank you, Kirti, for that. Okay, we'll probably one last question we'll take now. The question is, does the panel view TPMs as co-pilots or more air traffic controllers or other? Nihil, you raised your hand to answer this question. So why don't you take a stab at it?
A slightly tongue-in-cheek answer. Neither. I see both PMs and TPMs as stewards in a plane. The job is to not do anything. The job is to get the best people to do their best work. So the common analogy that is used is you are like a conductor in an orchestra, right? You're not doing anything of value. You are directing and lubricating the entire machinery to get the best job. So the connotation of both a co-pilot and an air traffic controller has this notion of you directing somebody to do something or doing something by yourself. It's neither of the two. It is to get the best minds together in a room, set them a clear goal, set them a clear vision, and ensure that all blockages from the time you get on a plane to get off the plane are removed.
Perfect.
That, yeah.
Thank you, Nihil. What a great answer to end this Q&A with. Yeah, so pretty much that's what we had. Zenith, I'll let you close it.
Yes, right on time, 6:00 p.m. as the best TPMs out there. We are finishing this meetup. Thank you again for joining. Thank you to our panelists. For those who are interested, as Harman mentioned, in the Slack space, you can reach out to our panelists. They're all also present in the TPM Slack space. And for what it was, I know everyone is hiring on the panel. So check out their openings. If you're an engineer or a product manager or a TPM, we do have the special channel called Opportunities in the Slack space. So please use that for further interactions. And I hope we'll get together sometime later this year. Thank you, everyone.